The ruby brooch had been missing for nearly 3 decades, yet it appeared one gray morning on the jacket of a man who slept behind restaurants and carried cans in a torn grocery bag. Celeste Harrow recognized it before she recognized the face beneath it, because that brooch had been made only once. For the son she had buried without a body, how could a piece of her lost child's life end up on a stranger who claimed not to know his own last name? And why did her younger son look more frightened than angry when he saw it? This story took place in Richmond, Virginia, on a busy stretch of West Franklin Street, not far from the Jefferson Hotel. Celeste Harrow, a 72-year-old real estate developer, whose company owned apartment buildings, medical offices, and renovated warehouse spaces across central Virginia, was sitting in the back of a black town car when the light caught the brooch through the tinted window. She had been reading a property agreement, but her hand froze above the page, as if her body had recognized danger before her mind could explain it. The man wearing the brooch was called Rowan, or at least that was the only name he used. He looked a little over 30, with dark hair that fell into his eyes, an old denim jacket torn at one cuff, and the careful posture of someone who expected strangers to move him along. He was not begging at that moment. He was sorting bottles from a public trash can and placing the clean ones into a plastic bag so he could take them to a recycling center before the afternoon crowd filled the sidewalks. Celeste ordered the driver to stop so suddenly that the car behind them leaned on its horn. Her security guard tried to ask what was wrong, but she was already opening the door. The old woman crossed the sidewalk with a speed that startled everyone who knew her pearl earrings trembling against her neck, her eyes fixed on the small round brooch with a dark red stone in the center, and fine silver threads curled around it like frost. Her guards blocked Rowan before he understood what was happening. The man lifted both hands, leaving the bag of cans hanging from one wrist, and told them he had not stolen anything. Celeste did not look at the bag, his torn shoes, or the people who had begun to slow down and watch. She pointed at the brooch and asked, in a voice that sounded less like an accusation than a wound reopening, where he had gotten it. Rowan looked down as if he had forgotten. The brooch was there. He explained that he had carried it for years, that it had come to him through a shelter donation box when he was younger, or maybe from a bag of things handed to him when he left a group home. The memory was not clean. His early life had gaps, and the brooch was one of the few objects that had stayed with him through every cheap motel, bus station, alley, and winter cot. Celeste's younger son, Keaton Harrow, stepped from the other side of the town car. At 45, he was lean, polished, and quiet in the way that made people measure their words around him. He told his mother that the man was probably lying, that an antique piece from the Harrow family did not pass into a shelter box by accident. Yet his face did not match his words. His jaw tightened too quickly, and his hands vanished into the pockets of his overcoat. The brooch had belonged to Silas Harrow, Celeste's older son. Silas had disappeared 28 years earlier after his car went off a coastal road near Virginia Beach during a storm. The vehicle had been found damaged near the water, but his body had never been recovered. Celeste had spent years paying private investigators, calling hospitals, and following rumors, until the courts finally allowed the family to settle the estate as if he were dead. Rowan did not know any of that. He only knew that a wealthy woman was staring at him as if he were carrying a ghost on his chest. When Celeste asked him to come with her, so she could hear the full story, he refused at first and said that if she believed a crime had been committed, she could call the Richmond Police Department. Celeste did not. She lowered her hand, softened her voice, and asked him to come, because she had been waiting too long for any sign of her son to ignore the first one that had ever appeared. That request unsettled Rowan more than the guards had. He had spent too many years learning when power was dressed as kindness. But there was something in Celeste's face that did not look like strategy. It looked like a mother trying not to collapse on a public sidewalk. He agreed, only after she promised that no one would touch him, take the brooch, or call the police unless he chose to leave with the jewelry himself. The town car carried them through Richmond toward Windsor Farms, where old brick houses sat behind hedges and iron gates. Rowan stayed close to the door, studying every turn. Celeste sat across from him without speaking, her gaze dropping again and again to the brooch. Keaton watched Rowan with the expression of a man deciding whether a stranger was a nuisance or a threat. Inside the Harrow mansion, the house manager led them to a library lined with law books, family photographs, and framed development awards. Celeste ordered food and water brought in. Rowan ate because hunger was stronger than pride, and because refusing a sandwich would not make him any safer. While he ate, Celeste removed a framed photo from the mantel and placed it on the table. The picture showed Silas Harrow in his 20s, standing beside the James River with a loose white shirt, dark curls, light hazel eyes, and the same ruby brooch pinned near his pocket. Rowan stared at the photograph longer than manners allowed. It was not recognition exactly. It was the sickening feeling of seeing pieces of his own face, arranged on someone else before memory had given him permission to understand them. Celeste asked about his family. Rowan answered that he did not know. He had been in foster care as a child, moved through homes in Portsmouth and Norfolk, and later aged out without a stable record. That made sense. Some papers called him Rowan Price. Others used Rowan Reed. He had no birth certificate he trusted, no parents he remembered clearly, and no explanation for the scar near his left eyebrow that appeared in every childhood photo the state still had. Keaton interrupted before Celeste could ask more. He said the only responsible step was to involve attorneys, verify Rowan's identity, and secure the brooch as family property. Celeste refused to take it from Rowan. Her refusal changed the air in the room. For the first time, Keaton looked at his mother not as a son annoyed by emotion, but as a man watching control slide out of his hands. That evening, Celeste arranged for Rowan to stay in the guest house with the door unlocked and a staff member posted outside only for safety. She also called a private genetic testing clinic and the family attorney, Marlon Greer, to begin a formal process. Rowan almost left twice before midnight, but the photograph of Silas on the table kept pulling him back. In the main house, Keaton made a phone call from the hallway, outside the library. He spoke softly and used no names. He only said that the object had appeared. The man was inside the house, and the old hospital problem had returned. When he ended the call, he looked toward the guest house window, where Rowan's shadow moved behind the curtains, and his calm face hardened into something far more dangerous than anger. By morning, the guest house had become a quiet battlefield. Celeste sent Rowan fresh clothes, but he wore only the clean shirt under his old jacket, because the brooch remained pinned to it. The family attorney arrived before breakfast and explained that any genetic test would require consent, identity notes, and a carefully documented sample. Rowan agreed, but only after Marlon confirmed that the result would not automatically give Celeste ownership of him, his story, or the object he carried. The first obstacle came from the records. The city social services files from Rowan's childhood were incomplete, and several transfers between foster homes had been scanned so badly that signatures were unreadable. One placement note mentioned that he had arrived as a toddler with a small personal item sealed in a plastic pouch, but the item was not described. Another note said he had nightmares after hearing heavy rain on windows, but there was no medical follow-up attached to the file. Celeste saw those pages and grew still. The storm near Virginia Beach, the missing body, the toddler without a family record, and the brooch all pointed in the same direction, but none of it was proof. Keaton used that weakness immediately. He told the attorney that Rowan could be someone who had learned just enough about the Harrow tragedy to take advantage of a grieving woman. Then he privately urged Celeste to keep the matter quiet, because the company board would question her judgment if news spread. Celeste made her first mistake out of fear. Instead of reporting the brooch discovery through a public missing person channel, or asking the court for help immediately, she agreed to keep everything inside the family for one day. She believed privacy would protect Rowan from reporters and protect Silas's memory from gossip. Keaton knew exactly how to use that delay. Rowan was taken to a clinic near Short Pump for a genetic sample. The technician, a young man named Mason Bell, seemed nervous before he even touched the sterile swab. He checked the hallway twice, mistyped Rowan's name, and asked whether anyone else had authority to receive the result. Rowan noticed because people who live without safety learn to notice small departures from routine. Celeste noticed nothing because she was watching Rowan's face for traces of Silas. That same afternoon, Keaton produced a folder of old court filings, shelter incident reports, and petty citations connected to people with similar names. Some belonged to Rowan. Several did not. He arranged them in a way that made the man look unstable, dishonest, and dangerous. Celeste read only the first few pages before closing the folder, but doubt had already entered the room. Rowan left the mansion before dinner. No one stopped him, because Celeste had promised he could go. He walked back toward the city with the clean shirt under his torn jacket, the ruby brooch against his chest, and a prepaid phone Marlon had given him in case the clinic called. He told himself he was leaving before rich people turned his life into a legal problem. Yet he did not throw the phone away. Near Monroe Park, a woman approached him from a bench and used his name without asking. She was Evelyn Sutter, a retired emergency room physician who had once worked in Norfolk. Her hair was gray, her hands were thin, and her eyes carried the exhausted caution of someone who had kept a secret for too long. She told Rowan that Celeste had contacted her years earlier about Silas, but that she had never told the full story because someone had threatened her career when she was young. Rowan did not trust her, but the doctor knew about the scar near his eyebrow before he mentioned it. She also knew that a toddler connected to an unidentified male patient had been routed through Portsmouth Social Services under temporary names. Evelyn said the unidentified patient had survived a coastal crash 28 years earlier, had no identification, and had been transferred to a state psychiatric hospital near Williamsburg with severe memory loss. The man had worn a ruby brooch when he came in. The staff removed it during treatment and sealed it with his belongings. Within days, the evidence log had been altered, and a well-dressed man had visited the hospital asking where the patient had gone. Evelyn had refused to release information without verified family status. 2 weeks later, the supervising doctor who backed her was hit with a complaint that damaged his career for years. Rowan wanted to know why she had waited. Evelyn answered that she had been young, in debt, and terrified, and that fear had become a habit. Then she gave him a folded note that Celeste had never seen. It had arrived anonymously years earlier and said that anyone searching for Silsa's harrow should not search only for the man who vanished, but for the child who had been left behind. Before Rowan could ask more, Evelyn saw a dark sedan slow near the curb. Her face changed. She told him not to go back to the mansion until he had something no one could erase. Then she pressed a business card into his hand and left through the park path without looking behind her. Rowan called the testing clinic from an alley behind a closed sandwich shop. Mason Bell answered in a whisper and admitted that someone had offered him money to destroy the genetic sample and wipe the appointment record. He said he had made a copy of the lab data before deleting the file from the clinic system, but he needed protection before handing it over. Rowan had no protection to offer, only the truth that if Mason stayed silent, Keaton would own him. They agreed to meet the next morning at a coffee shop in the Fan District. Rowan spent the night in a shelter bed, one hand inside his jacket, fingers closed around the brooch. Before sunrise, he woke to the sound of someone asking for him at the front desk. The worker said 2 men were outside, claiming they had been sent by Celeste. When Rowan looked through the glass door, neither man wore the guarded patience of someone sent by a worried grandmother. They looked like men hired to make sure a meeting never happened. Rowan slipped out through the shelter kitchen while a volunteer was unloading bread crates. He crossed an alley, cut behind a row of townhouses, and reached the coffee shop from the opposite direction. Mason Bell was not inside. A paper cup sat untouched on a corner table, and a woman near the window kept glancing at the door as if she had been told to watch for someone. The prepaid phone buzzed before Rowan could leave. Mason's voice shook as he said that he had been followed, that his apartment manager had received questions about his lease, and that someone had sent a photo of his younger sister walking into her nursing program. He had deleted the outside copy in panic. Then, after a long pause, he admitted he had not destroyed everything. He had mailed a sealed drive to himself, through a private mailbox in Chesterfield, because he was afraid his own apartment would be searched. Rowan understood that Mason had chosen the worst possible middle ground. He had angered whoever was paying him without fully protecting the evidence. The technician refused to meet now, but he gave Rowan the mailbox address and said the drive could be picked up only with the claim slip in his car. Before he could explain where the car was, the call ended. With no legal identification, no money for a ride, and two men searching for him, Rowan faced a choice that cost him either way. He could go to Celeste and risk leading Keaton straight to the doctor's evidence, or he could go to Evelyn Sutter alone and pull her deeper into danger. He chose Evelyn because the doctor had already spent decades hiding from the same truth, and because Celeste's house no longer felt like a place where secrets survived. Evelyn lived in a modest apartment near Norfolk, in a building where the hallway smelled faintly of laundry soap and old carpet. Rowan reached it by bus and on foot, arriving with the ruby brooch hidden under his shirt. The doctor opened the door with the security chain still on. When she saw his face, she removed the chain without asking for a name. Her apartment was filled with labeled boxes, old notebooks, and sealed envelopes. Evelyn had not trusted digital records for years. She told Rowan that on the night of the crash, the unidentified male patient had been brought in with trauma, burns, and no wallet. The brooch had been pinned to the remains of his shirt, but tucked behind it was a small hospital bracelet from a maternity ward. That detail never entered the official report. Rowan stopped breathing normally when she placed a sealed envelope on the table. Inside was a damaged photograph protected in clear plastic. It showed a young man and a pregnant woman near the ocean. The man's face was partly blurred by heat damage, but the brooch was clear. The woman stood with one hand on her belly, her eyes steady, her posture strangely familiar. Evelyn believed she was Rowan's mother. The doctor also had a copy of an intake note from a Portsmouth social worker. A toddler had been found connected to a woman who disappeared from a hospital after giving birth. The child had no confirmed surname, and a small red-stoned pin had been listed as a personal keepsake before vanishing from later foster records. Rowan realized that the brooch had not randomly come to him through trash or charity. It had followed him through broken systems until memory turned inheritance into an accident. That discovery changed how he saw Celeste. She was not simply a rich woman chasing a lost son through a stranger. She might be his grandmother. Silas might not be a dead man in a framed photograph, but a living father erased by fear, injury, and someone else's convenience. Still, a living father who had never come back was not comfort. It was another wound waiting to be understood. Evelyn gave Rowan one more item, a handwritten statement naming the man who had visited the hospital after Silas's transfer. She had not known him then, but years later, when Celeste hired investigators and family photographs appeared in private correspondence, she recognized him as Keaton Harrow. The statement alone could not convict anyone, but it could force questions Keaton had avoided for decades. Rowan returned to Richmond that evening and went straight to the Harrow mansion. Celeste was in the front room with Marlon Greer and Keaton. The moment Rowan entered, Keaton's face tightened for less than a breath, but it was enough. Rowan placed the damaged photograph, the copied intake note, and Evelyn's statement on the table. Celeste touched the photograph as if the plastic might burn her. She did not cry. She asked Keaton whether he had known that Silas survived the crash. Keaton said he had not, but the answer came too late. Celeste had raised him, negotiated with him, argued with him, and trusted him in boardrooms for too many years not to recognize the delay. Marlon advised everyone to stop speaking until the documents could be reviewed. Keaton agreed too quickly. He asked for a formal meeting the next morning at the attorney's office, where evidence could be examined with chain of custody, and where Rowan's claims could be separated from emotion. Celeste accepted because she wanted the truth to survive legally, not only personally. Rowan left the house with the originals hidden inside his jacket. He knew Keaton had read his refusal to surrender them. Near the end of the driveway, a black sport utility vehicle rolled slowly past the gate and turned the corner without headlights. The next morning's meeting had already become something else. Rowan could feel it in the careful silence of the street. The meeting never happened. Before dawn, Marlon Greer called Rowan and told him not to come to the office by the front entrance. The attorney's building had received 2 anonymous messages claiming that Rowan intended to extort the Harrow family with forged documents. Marlon did not believe them, but he understood what they were meant to do. They created a paper trail that made Rowan look like the threat before he could present himself as a witness. Rowan changed direction and went to the Chesterfield mailbox store Mason had mentioned. He did not have the claim slip, but he had Mason's full name and enough desperation to wait outside until the clerk took a break. While he was watching the parking lot, two men approached from opposite sides. Neither raised a weapon. One only put a hand on Rowan's shoulder and told him that Keaton wanted a private conversation. They took him to a finished basement beneath a house in Henrico County, a place too clean to look criminal and too empty to feel normal. Keaton sat at a small table with 2 cups of coffee in front of him. He did not shout. He did not insult Rowan first. He treated the moment like a business negotiation, which made it colder. Keaton told Rowan that a person without a stable name, address, or official history should be careful before accusing a harrow. Then he offered him money to leave Virginia, enough for an apartment, medical care, and a new start somewhere no one would ask about the brooch. Rowan asked whether Silas had survived. Keaton did not answer. That refusal was the first honest thing he had given. Rowan said he was not selling the truth. Keaton's polite mask thinned. He explained that evidence could disappear, witnesses could change their minds, and people who had spent years outside the system could be made visible again with very little effort. Then he let Rowan go 6 blocks from the house, as if proving that he did not need to hurt him to control him. By afternoon, the attack became public. 2 local websites published stories suggesting that a homeless man with a criminal record had targeted Celeste Harrow with a fake heir claim. One article included an old shelter photo of Rowan. Another mentioned the ruby brooch, but called it alleged family property. Keaton had made the secret dirty before Celeste could make it official. The plan backfired because Evelyn had expected fear to return. While Rowan was being taken to Keaton, she had gone to a law office in Norfolk and recorded a sworn statement by video. She also placed a sealed envelope in Marlon Greer's hands through a courier. Inside was an old cassette recording copied to a drive, notes from the hospital transfer, and the name of a retired nurse who remembered the unidentified patient being moved under pressure. The recording mattered most. On it, a younger Keaton's voice could be heard demanding information about an unidentified man transferred from the emergency room, then warning that careers could become fragile when people refused powerful families. The sound was imperfect, but the voice was clear enough for Marlon to advise Celeste to contact law enforcement. Celeste made her own decision before the attorney finished. She called a press conference outside the Harrow Company office in downtown Richmond. She did not name Rowan as family yet. She said, only that new evidence suggested her son, Silas, may have survived the crash that had defined her family for 28 years, and that someone may have interfered with medical records and witnesses. She asked anyone with information to come forward through counsel or the Richmond Police Department. That public statement stripped Keaton of the quiet room he needed. Investors called. Board members demanded answers. Reporters found Evelyn's old hospital connection, and then the state psychiatric hospital transfer. Marlon filed a formal complaint with the Richmond Police Department and the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, focusing on witness intimidation, obstruction, and possible fraud tied to the handling of Silas's estate. Keaton did not run far. Officers found him 2 days later at a house near the Rappahannock River that the family used as a private retreat. He was sitting on a screened porch with a legal pad. Already preparing his version of events, he was detained without a dramatic scene. Men like Keaton often trusted procedure more than panic, because procedure had protected them for most of their lives. Rowan learned about the detention while standing outside Marlon's office, still holding the brooch through the fabric of his shirt. The genetic result had not yet arrived. Mason had not reappeared, and Silas was still missing. Celeste was inside waiting for him, no longer guarded by certainty, only by the kind of hope that can destroy a person if the next piece of paper says the wrong thing. The official genetic report arrived 12 days later. Marlon read it first, then passed it to Rowan without softening the moment. The result showed an extremely strong direct grandparent relationship between Celeste Harrow and Rowan. The language was clinical, but the consequence was not. The man who had slept behind restaurants was not a stranger wearing a stolen brooch. He was Celeste's grandson. Rowan did not celebrate. He folded the paper slowly and placed it beside the damaged photograph. Proof gave him a name, but it also gave him losses he could no longer dismiss as bad luck. His missing father had survived. His grandmother had lived 28 years in false mourning. His uncle had built power over a silence that belonged to everyone else. Celeste received the result in the garden behind the mansion. She touched Rowan's face once carefully, as if asking permission through the gesture itself. Then she stepped back. She did not ask him to call her anything. She did not ask him to move in. She only told him that he had a place in the family, if he ever wanted to stand in it. Widened. Detectives interviewed Evelyn, the retired nurse, Mason Bell, and former employees from the Harrow company. Mason finally came forward through an attorney after learning that Keaton had been detained. He admitted that a man connected to Keaton had paid him to destroy the test record, but that he had preserved enough metadata to prove interference. His statement did not make him innocent, but it made the larger pattern harder to deny. Marlon also reopened the estate question. When Silas had been declared legally dead, Keaton had received authority over shares, property decisions, and family voting rights that should have been handled differently if there had been credible evidence that Silas survived or had a child. That did not mean every transaction could be undone overnight. It meant years of business choices were now tied to possible fraud. Each truth forced another action. Celeste removed Keaton from all company roles pending investigation. The board appointed an outside firm to review records. The Commonwealth's attorney pursued charges connected to intimidation and obstruction first, because those had the clearest witnesses. The financial questions would take longer, and everyone knew Keaton's defense attorneys would fight every word. The largest confrontation happened in a private legal conference, not a courtroom. Keaton sat with his attorneys, Celeste sat with Marlon, and Rowan sat at the end of the table wearing the brooch openly for the first time. No one shouted. Marlon played part of Evelyn's recording, then placed the genetic report and the old transfer note in sequence. Keaton's attorneys objected to almost everything, but Keaton's face changed when the retired nurse's statement named the day he had appeared at the hospital. Celeste asked one question through her attorney, whether Keaton had known Silas was alive when the estate process began. Keaton did not answer directly. He claimed that he had only heard rumors, that the unidentified patient could have been anyone, and that he had wanted to protect the family from scams. Yet the old recording, the erased access log, the pressure on doctors, and the attack on Rowan made protection sound like another word for control. Rowan listened without speaking until Keaton's attorney suggested that he had benefited from the story. Then he gave a short statement through Marlon. He said he had entered the matter with no home, no identification that felt fully his, and no plan to ask for money. What he wanted now was not a mansion or a company share. He wanted to know who had decided that a child could be left nameless, because an injured man was more useful dead than alive. That statement did what anger could not. Celeste left the room before the meeting ended. Not because she was weak, but because she could no longer sit across from one son while understanding what he had done to another. Keaton watched her leave, and for the first time, his control looked like loneliness. The last unresolved question was Silas. Court orders opened the old psychiatric hospital trail. The records showed that the unidentified patient had been discharged years after the crash under a temporary name, with severe memory gaps and no verified family contact. From there, the trail moved through shelters, day labor offices, and finally vanished in Western Virginia. 3 weeks after the genetic result, a letter arrived at Marlon's office addressed to Rowan. It was handwritten, mailed from Roanoke, and signed with the name Silas Harrow. Rowan carried it to Monroe Park before opening it. He had searched for a father in documents, but paper from the living was heavier than any record from the dead. The letter from Roanoke decided what no attorney had been able to finish. Silas wrote that he had lived for years under the name Thomas Reed, given to him by a hardware store owner who found him doing day labor after his discharge. Memory had returned slowly, first as sounds and smells, then as faces. When he remembered Keaton, he understood why fear had kept him from returning before he understood what had been taken from him. Silas wrote that he had not known Rowan existed. He had remembered a woman named Mira, Rowan's mother, but not clearly enough to find her. Only when Celeste's public statement reached the news did he see the brooch and the scar near Rowan's eyebrow. The sight broke through the last wall in his memory. He remembered pinning the ruby brooch to a small blanket the night his son was born because he had nothing else valuable with him and wanted the child to carry something from the Harrow line. That was the full answer to the mystery Celeste had seen from her town car window. The brooch was not stolen from Silas after death. It had passed from Silas to his newborn son, then through hospital confusion, foster paperwork, misplaced belongings, shelter bags, and Rowan's own fractured memory until it returned to the street where Celeste could see it. The object had survived because no one who handled it understood what it was worth, and because Rowan, even without knowing why, kept choosing not to let it go. Silas did not ask forgiveness in the letter. He wrote that he had no right to demand a place in Rowan's life after so much time, even if the absence had begun in injury and fear. He explained that he owned a small hardware store in Roanoke, lived quietly above it, and had spent years believing that returning to the Harrows would place him back under Keaton's reach. He had been wrong about many things, but not about the danger his brother represented. Rowan took the letter to Celeste that same afternoon. She read it in the front room, standing beside the mantel where Silas's photograph had sat for years like a sealed grave. When she reached the line about Roanoke, she lowered herself into a chair. Her son was alive, not whole in the way she had once prayed for, not returned without damage, but alive in a city less than a few hours away. The reunion did not happen that night. Celeste wanted to leave immediately, but Rowan asked her to wait until Silas answered by phone and agreed. The request hurt her, yet she accepted it. After losing one son to another man's control, she refused to turn love into pressure. 2 days later, Silas spoke with Marlon, then with Celeste, and finally with Rowan. None of those calls fixed the years. They only opened a door that had been bricked over from both sides. Keaton's legal case moved slowly, as serious cases with money and old evidence often do. He was not convicted in a single dramatic hearing. Prosecutors built their case around witness intimidation, obstruction, and financial misconduct tied to the estate. Some charges were contested. Some evidence required hearings. Evelyn's recording, Mason's statement, hospital transfer records, and Silas's living testimony made it impossible for Keaton to return to the clean version of the past he had sold for decades. Celeste stepped back from daily control of the company and placed outside oversight over the family trust. She also funded legal help for former foster youth in Richmond and Portsmouth, not as a public apology, but because she had finally seen how easily a child could pass through official rooms without anyone protecting the story attached to him. Rowan did not become a polished heir overnight. He met with social workers to rebuild identification, with doctors to treat years of neglect, and with a counselor who understood that finding a family can be another kind of shock. Mira, Rowan's mother, remained the one absence no document could fully repair. Investigators found traces of her under another name in North Carolina, then nothing certain. Silas admitted that he had loved her and failed to protect the memory of her when his own mind broke apart. Rowan kept her damaged photograph beside the genetic report, not because it answered everything, but because it proved she had existed outside rumor. Months later, Rowan agreed to spend one night in the mansion. He chose the smaller guest room overlooking the back garden, not Silas's old room. Celeste did not argue. Silas came from Roanoke the next morning in a plain sedan, with a box of hardware store coffee mugs in the back seat, because he did not know what else to bring. Father and son met on the brick path near the garden, both standing too still at first, both carrying the same habit of absorbing pain without moving. No speech made the moment clean. Silas did not become a perfect father by arriving, and Rowan did not become a healed son by staying. Celeste watched from the porch and did not interrupt. The brooch rested in Rowan's palm between them, its red stone catching the morning light. Silas touched it once, then let Rowan close his fingers around it again. That evening, Rowan placed the brooch on the mantel, beside the old photograph, but only for a while. Before going upstairs, he returned and pinned it back inside his jacket where it could not be seen. He was not ready to display the Harrow name on his chest. He was ready only to carry the truth differently. Outside, the garden lights came on one by one, and for the first time, the house did not feel like a wall built around secrets. It felt like a place where silence had finally begun to lose its power.